Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today, I'm joined by retired Command Sergeant Major Bradley Jones. Brad spent more than 30 years in the Army serving all over the world, including a tour in Afghanistan. He's the author of a new book called Treading the Deep, where he shares life and leadership lessons from his time in the military. I am honored to have him on the show to talk about this book and to talk about his story. So, Brad, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks, John, for having me here. Grateful to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on the show, and thank you for your long service. And I really want to get into it and some of the lessons you learned. But remarkable time you spent. How long in total did you spend in the military?
There was my active duty time from '84 to '88. Then I had a 3-year break in service, joined the Guard in '93, and then served all the way till 2020,
Wow.
basically. So I was still kind of in the inactive reserve,
Right.
I guess, between service break, and so it's over 30 years.
Wow. Wow. Fantastic. I mean, we were talking before we started the podcast. I was in for 5. And so I don't think it even counts when you're 5 compared to 30. So, but I really appreciate your long service. And that's what I want to start off talking about is like, why did you join the military in the first place? So what caused you to go down to your recruiter's office and say, you know what, I'm going to join the Army of all things?
Well, my best friend in my senior year in high school, his name was Paul. He joined and was on the delayed entry program, and so we graduated together. And then during that summer, I was with him, and he said, "Hey, I need to stop by the recruiting office," and he was getting ready to ship out. And so asked if I wanted to go, and I said, "Sure, okay, that's fine." So I basically went in, and of course, recruiters being recruiters, they, asked if I had ever thought about it, and I was like, "No, not really." And then they said, "Well, why don't you just take a practice ASVAB exam?" And so I did, and I scored really well on it. And they said, "You know what? There's really no jobs that are unavailable to you." So I ended up sitting down with the recruiter and looking at several fields, and I knew I didn't want to be infantry. I wanted to do something in the technical environment, and so they sat me down in front of a computer and showed me a bunch of different positions. I suddenly, at that moment, remembered that I loved to go down by the Portland International Airport and watch planes land. So I thought, something on an airfield would really interest me, and they came up with radar repairman. And so I said, "You get me that job, and I'll enlist," and the rest is history.
Wow. So it's interesting your story. You know, I've talked to a lot of veterans, and some will tell me that they dreamed from like the time they were a kid that they wanted to be in the military. And others will say just the same story you just said. Well, a buddy of mine joined up, and I just went to the recruit, said almost the same story. I just showed up, and then they said, "Hey, take the test." And next thing you know, you're signing up. So for you, it wasn't something that you wanted to do, your whole life. It was sort of, hey, what am I going to do with my life next? My buddy's joining the Army, might as well try it.
Well, I mean, the thing was that at that time in my life, I was done with school, and I just thought, you know what, I really want to just train to do something and then do that job. I I wasn't interested in going on to college, and one, I didn't have the money, and so I knew that really wasn't an option. So, you know, looking over jobs in the military, I thought I can get trained, and I can go do that job, and that's, I think, you know what really spoke to me the most.
So you were active duty as doing radar repairs, but then you left and then you joined up in the Guard doing something completely different. Is that right?
Well, no, a little bit of the reverse. I
Okay.
trained as a radar repairman,
Ah, yeah.
and then I went and got stationed in Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And after being in a training status I ended up being in school for a year, for 52 weeks. The original MOS was only 22, but it ended up being 52 weeks with delays and other things. And so when I got out to Fort Huachuca and got to my section, first thing I noticed was it wasn't near the airfield. And I said, "Well, where are the radars?" And they said, "Oh, well, you're not going to work on radars." And that was a hard pill to swallow because I'd been training for so long, and anyways, I ended up being uh, sent to the electronic proving ground, and that turned out to be just a very unique assignment. And so I had to kind of shift gears and go, okay, well, I guess this is kind of what I need to focus on, and this is my future, is to do the job that they're asking me to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting. You've got that in the stories in the book, and I love that. You train for a year to do one job. You get there, and you're like, they don't give you that job, and you were like going to complain about it, or you did complain about it. And I love the chapter. It's called "Lead by Example." Uh, Tell us about the. I can't remember if it was what his rank was, but the kind of the
Master
senior
sergeant.
master sergeant. Okay, the
Yeah.
master sergeant, and you tell us a little about that story, because I love that story where you're challenging, you're nervous, you're young, and you're challenging this guy, and he's like, he just seemed like a really good leader. So I wanted to hear a little bit of that story.
His name was Master Sergeant Jack Crumling, and you know, I I felt at least that I needed to say something and and at least express some of my frustration about training for so long and then having to basically switch gears completely. And so I went into his office and said, "Can I talk to you?" And sat down and just kind of took a risk to express how I felt, the frustration I felt of not being able to work on radars and being asked to do this completely different job. And I knew going in, like, he could react a number of different ways, and obviously a few of them not positive, where he could just tell me, "Hey, you know, quit whining and just do what the Army's asked you to do. You're in the Army." But he didn't. He listened to me, and then he said, "Hey, if you want to go down to the radar lab, let's go." And so we went down and met the guy that I was told I was going to work for when I was back in school, and the, they were the airfield had been switched over to contractor maintenance, and so all the people that were my MOS were all waiting for orders to go somewhere else, and so that guy at least could see my the look on my face and said, "You know what? Yeah, if you're working for Jack, he's going to take care of you. You're going to do a really cool job," and basically encourage me to um, go that direction. And so and then at that point, Jack, you know, talked to me and came out. We ended up driving around to a couple different sites on the base, and he showed me night vision goggles. That was, those were being tested, which that was mind blowing at the time. And UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, they were being tested. Um, and then, once we went to a couple of those places, and Jack at some point just said, "Are you on the team?" And I said, "Absolutely, absolutely."
I
So
love that story, because he didn't need to do that, right? He could have just said, "Suck it up, Buttercup. You're in
yep.
you're in my group now. I don't care what kind of training you had. You're going to do what I tell you now." But he didn't do that. In fact, he even took you over. He drove you over to the radar area, and for you to learn that there was nothing to do in that field. And then instead, like, you got this really cool job, a really unique job in the Army. And I just love the way he just, because of his rank, he could have done anything he wanted to you, but he didn't.
Absolutely.
He took you under his wing. And I think that I see that speaks a lot to like new employees when they come to a company, right? A lot of times we throw them in a cubicle, put them in the corner, and we give them some menial task. And when they say, "Well, I don't really understand," like, just do your job, when, and he could have done that. He didn't. I love that story in the book, because I think it gives an example of how we should be leading our people, to listen to them, to care, and to, it's not about rank, it's about, and I think, I would imagine your loyalty to him was like off the charts because of the way
Oh,
he treated you.
absolutely. His stock just shot way up, and I thought, "Hey, this guy I can trust,"
Yeah.
and there are several chapters written about our relationship and, what he meant to me and stuff. And, you know, I didn't really recognize until probably a number of years later the impact, just the magnitude of what, his impact on me and how he treated me. And so, as I became a leader and moved up in the ranks and stuff, I think one of the things that um, spoke to me the most about how he handled the situation was, he cared about what I thought, but then also he painted the picture for me. And when soldiers know, or when service members know, the whys and the wherefores and stuff. I mean, obviously there's a time where you don't have time for that, but for the most part, when they know the whys and the wherefores, then they are motivated, and they can see the purpose in it, and it helps them, um, in integrating into the team, and um, working towards a common goal.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, it's really true. People want to do worthwhile work. They want to know that work matters. And so we have to bring them in on the vision, right? We have to show them the bigger picture and how their role fits into the big picture. And great leaders do that. They take you alongside and they say, here's where we're going, here's what we're doing. And do you want to be part, do you want to be, you, I love that. Do you want to be part of my team? And you're like, yeah,
Yep.
absolutely. Why would I not? This sounds awesome.
Yep.
So when did you, I mean, when it, you, again, your story, you started in the military sort of because your a buddy did. And then, at what point in your career did you say, you know what, I'm going to make a career out of this. I'm going to do 20 years and eventually 30 years. At what point, was there any defining moment that said, you know what, I love this so much that I'm going to stay in?
Um, when you have a break in service, and I had a break in service after my 4-year enlistment. It just never left my system. It
Mhm.
seemed like, I went to South America and served as a missionary, and my military service absolutely, created the trajectory that those 2 years in South America followed. And so, amongst the missionaries, it was like, oh, he's that dude that did 4 years in the army.
Yeah.
And so, it kind of separated me from regular, everyday missionaries. But when I came back, it was something like I couldn't I couldn't say. Everywhere I went, it seemed like I ran into somebody and talked to them about the military. And so, when my first wife, and I were newlyweds, or had been married a few months, I said, I want to go down and, join the Guard. I was already drawing, uh, you know, the Veterans Education Assistance Program for my studies, and joining the Guard helped, you know, to create another income source, for each month, and then obviously 2 weeks in the summer. So I went down, and, the recruiter said, oh, we have several units here. We have an aviation unit that has Apaches, and I just said, we don't need to go any farther than that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wild. Yeah, the Apache helicopter is a wild piece of
Oh
equipment.
yeah,
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to say no. I say yes to that. So,
yeah,
and so it's interesting. So, were you with Apaches the whole time, or at least?
yeah.
Okay.
The rest of my career, was spent, working on Apache helicopters. I joined the unit, and then shortly thereafter, went out to Virginia, to Newport News, and to Fort Eustis, and, reclassed as a armament, specialist on the Apache. And, um, came back from that, and then, was just a regular, I was a college student, 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks in the summer. And then they offered me a full-time position to work on them full time. And so I jumped at the chance to, work on a $20 million helicopter. And so I worked for them for 8 years. And then, right away, um, I was asked to take leadership positions because they gave me I'm 85 when I was in the regular army, and then they gave me my E5 back in the guard. And so those experiences, I was asked to be a squad leader and stuff. So that it kind of started back then, and then it just it working for them, you have to be in the unit. So
Mm.
the next 8 years kind of spelled out uh, at least that career path. And then I shifted gears again and went over to the Federal Aviation Administration. And because I was a radar repairman early in the Army, or at least I was trained, I never did the job, but I was trained. That got me my position with the FAA later on. But when I, at that point, when I told the unit um, that I was leaving full-time employment and going to the FAA, of course, their first question is, well, are you going to get out? And I said, no, I'm not. And I think that kind of, spoke to them that I was dedicated. I think that point in my life, I realized I have something to offer here, and you know, and taking the lessons from Jack and other leaders back early in my career, I was like, I can do this. I can do this.
Yeah. Well, you did, and you stayed doing it for a long
Yep.
time. So I want to talk about your book. And for those who are on YouTube, I'm holding the book up right here. The book is called Treading the Deep: Inspirational Lessons on Life and Leadership. So first of all, tell us the title. What's the significance of the title, Treading the Deep?
Well, the name came about uh, due to a conversation I had with my section leaders. I was right before we were deployed to Afghanistan. We were in doing MOB training in Fort Hood, Texas. So I was over Delta Company, the maintenance company, in an Apache battalion, and one of my section leaders called me and said, "Can you believe what so and so is doing? You're not going to stand for that, are you?" And I just thought, I'm not. No, I'm not doing this. So I texted all my section leaders and said, "I want to see you in my office at 7 o'clock tonight." And of course, they all came and stuff, and we sat down. And I just said, "Look, guys, you are one step away from where I'm at." And I said, I don't know the guy that run the section leader that ran prop and rotor. I said, I don't know your job. The section leader that ran aircraft maintenance, I don't know your job. I've never done that job. Uh, the section leader that ran the armament section, I'm like, okay, I know that job. I did that job. But there's production control, there's quality control, there's supply, all those sections. I told them, I depend on you to be the subject matter experts, and my job is to make you successful. And I said, and you guys need to learn how to tread deep water.
Mm.
And if you have a problem with another leader, don't come to me. You are far enough in your career that you should be able to go to that person and solve it there. If you try to solve it at that point and you can't, fine, come to me and I'll give you my guidance on it. But you need to learn how to tread deep water.
Mm.
And it just I don't know where I came up with that, but it just popped in my head. And then when of course, when um, I had a number of different titles for the book, or original, working titles. And when I told um, my published relations people at Morgan James Publishing, when I told them the story, they were like, "That's it. That's the title right there. That's it."
I love it.
So
I love it. Well, being this is the Deep Leadership Podcast. I do like the title, so it fits our theme very well. So why did you feel compelled to write this book? So, you know, you could have had all these great memories and you know, went off to your civilian career and life was good. Why did you, and writing a book is difficult. It's time consuming. It takes a lot of effort. Why did you write this book? And what are your hopes for this book? Because it just came out in November. Is that right? Last year?
It's downloadable on Kindle right now.
Okay.
It will be in Barnes and Noble. It'll be in all the major bookstores in June 14th is the release date.
Wow. Okay. So I got an early copy of it then. All right.
Yeah,
Great.
you have an advanced copy.
Excellent. Oh, that's great. So, but so why'd you write the book and what are your hopes for the book?
Um, when I when I was over in Afghanistan, I got informed that I was being input for the Sergeant Major's Academy, and the funny thing about that is, like, my Sergeant Major at the time called me and said, come over to my office. I want to talk to you." And he said, "We have one slot in aviation, and we're inputting you for the Sergeant Major's Academy, the non-resident course." And I actually argued with him, and because I was like, "I'm too busy. Why can't I do this when we get back from the deployment?" And he just said, "Shut up. You're going. I don't want to hear it. You're going." So I had to start the course material while I was still in a deployed status. And one of the things that you do in that course is you write many personal experience papers, they call them. And so I wrote a number of personal experience papers. And basically, when I finished that course, I had quite a body of work. And so,
Yeah.
when I came back, I was I thought I would be a first sergeant for a number of, few more years at least. And all of a sudden, circumstances changed, and I got promoted to command sergeant major over the battalion. And so at that point, most leaders have a command philosophy of some sort. So I started to kind of contemplate that, um, what what I wanted to put out, and what my emphasis and stuff. But I have this body of work, and so that's kind of where the ball started to roll. And so I started to write, especially some of the experiences I had as a young soldier that are in the book, that are absolutely phenomenally embarrassing, but they're hilarious now.
Yeah.
Um, so, I know you're familiar with that, from reading your book. Some of those things that you just shake your head, and I guess I survived.
Right, right, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, we've all been well, I have a son in the Navy, so he's enlisted. He's coming up for E4 here shortly. And so, I told him, I said, well, you're moving ahead of me. I only got to O3. He's like, well, Dad, O3 is so much higher than
Oh yeah.
than E4. I'm like, no, you don't understand. An O1 is like an E1 when you show up to you're still nothing and nobody, even though they try to put you in charge, you're still nobody. And it's a lot.
Bottom of the totem pole.
You're at the bottom of the totem pole. You got to learn the whole thing, and you
Yep.
know, having that butter bar gets you nothing. In fact, it's the most embarrassing rank that anyone can have in the military. So I wanted to get rid of that thing as quick as possible. So
Well, you showed, though, that you work hard at that stage of the game, and that sets the tone for what comes later.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like that in your career, your civilian career too. As I talk to people, and I talk to a lot of young people, and I was like, you've got to earn your oxygen. You've got to be valuable, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to earn that right to move up. And yeah, for me at least, I didn't want to be that. We called them a nub. The people who are unqualified, non-useful bodies. I didn't want to be a non-useful body, so I worked hard to try not to be, or to try to be useful. And it sounds like you just reading what you went through, you did the same thing. You were working to add value, to be, and we all make mistakes in the early part of our careers, but you were working hard to be qualified, to be able to add value. And I think that's really important. One thing I want to ask you, going from this, I mean, it's crazy what you did, going from an E1 to E9. That's a significant. You went through the entire rank, all of them.
Yep.
Where in that spectrum did you like, because I mean, you start off as a doer and then you become a leader. So you're 100% do as an E1 and you're 100% lead at E9. So when did you realize in that spectrum where you were like, oh, I'm a leader now. I'm more of a leader than I am. My technical knowledge isn't as important as my leadership knowledge.
Um, when I was over in Kuwait when September 11th happened. We were on a routine deployment, part of Operation Southern Watch, providing security around uh, Kuwait and the borders of Kuwait. And of course, when September 11th happened, everything just like changed tremendously. And at that point, I think I really started to feel like, okay, I need to step up. And I was leading a shift, and another guy that was in charge of the armament section. He was the overall NCOIC of the section, or non-commissioned officer in charge, and he had a family emergency. He had to return back to the States, and so my first sergeant called me on the phone and said, um, "Hey, you know, he has to leave," and so we had an E7, and I was an E6. We had an E7 who um, was never part of the armament shop. He didn't know our job, and so the first sergeant said, well, I guess he's in charge. And I got off the phone, and then I just kind of stopped and I said, wait a minute. And I called him back and I said, no, he's not in charge. I'm in charge.
Yeah.
And it was a long pause, and he goes, you know what? You're right. You're in
Yeah.
charge. And so at that point, those opportunities to step up and um, to take charge and to be a leader, it presented itself, and I'm grateful that I called him back on the phone and said,
Yeah.
hey, wait a
Yeah.
minute. And so that's when it started, basically. And then when that other leader came back, at that point, we just kind of did it, he and I, as a team. And so, but like I said, it went from a routine deployment to like a very serious
Yeah.
deployment, a very serious tone to it and stuff.
It's 9/11 and you're in the Middle East.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
serious. Yeah.
it and just, it doesn't matter where I go in the world. I can always say it's it's not as hot as it was in Kuwait.
Yes. Yeah. I have been to Kuwait twice and it is very hot. So I agree with that. So, um, let's see. So one of the things that so this book is interesting. It's not just a leadership book; it's a life book. It's one of the things I like about it is you talk about your family quite a bit in the book, and you have an interesting family experience. Talk about and this may be hard to talk about, but I think it'd be interesting for people to hear that you do talk about a time where you had a real what you call a defining moment, a major defining moment in your family and a major change in your family. And it ended up where you had a big family dynamic shift because of it. Talk about that, and how did that affect you and how you lead both your family and at work?
Well, I had my first wife passed away suddenly in the summer of 2003. And so I was 37 years old, and I remember thinking, that's the kind of thing that happens to somebody in their, I don't know, 70s or 80s, something like that, not 37. And so, at that point, I had my three children, my son and my two daughters, and you know, that's a really difficult thing to go through, especially worried about my kids and how it was going to affect them, and losing their mom. And um, that was a really tenuous time. And gratefully, I was my wife, one of her good friends, who she was roommates in college with, and she was actually a bridesmaid in our wedding back in 1992. And she she been married and divorced, and had a daughter, and but she and my wife were close friends, and they did things together. Our kids had birthday parties together and stuff. So when I called her to tell her that what had happened to Randy, my first wife, she said, I'll help you. I'll help you out. And so one thing basically kind of flowed into the next, and we were married, and so we combined our family of my three and her one daughter, or my three kids and her one daughter, and at that point, I think one of the things that kind of taught me is we talk when people kind of describe me, they say, oh, he has a combined family, and which is true. And one day it kind of hit me, well, the military is a combined family.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're always like detaching and then reattaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
You go to a different place, and all of a sudden you're ushered into a new family dynamic. And so I think I mean I com- uh, relied tremendously on the associations I had in the Guard when my wife passed away. I had just come back from a leadership school. I was promotable to E7, and um, the associations I had and have in the military, and especially at that time, were monumentally invaluable to me, and they were there for me. And as with many other people, family members, uh, obviously, but there was just you felt like they had your back, and they were there for me. I had probably 10 people from my unit show up to my house the day she passed away, later on that day, just came to check on me, and so those associations, they just don't come every day. And obviously I wasn't expecting something like that to happen at such a young age, but um, we got through it, and I married Jen, and we had two kids of our own, and they're 16 and 15 now. So my oldest is 28, and that's my son Matt, and then my youngest is Daniel. He's 15. So I have bookends are boys, and then four girls in between.
When I read that chapter, of course, I didn't even, it's very emotional to read the chapter. I mean, to be honest, because I put myself in your shoes. I've been married for 30 years, the same woman I was married to in the military. And I just, like, I can imagine myself being that age and having that happen. And I had two boys at the time, and how do you deal with that? And one of the things that stood out in my mind is just the way you led your children during this time, and your wife's family and your family through that. And it's almost like the leadership training sort of kicked in, your military training kicked in, and you took ownership, and you made, I mean, you were going through probably the toughest thing that any man will go through, except maybe losing a child. It doesn't matter. It's one of the toughest things anyone can go through. But yet the way you were able to lead everybody through that, I think that was something that stood out when I read that chapter, is just standing up, taking the lead. And I know, as leaders, we get these situations where we're dealing with emotional issues ourselves, and we sort of have to internalize it for others, and to lead them through this tough time. And then we take our times, like in the quiet moments at night, and deal with our emotions when no one's watching. And I felt that when I read that part of the chapter.
Well, and one of the things that you alluded to, as as a leader, is just especially for service members that have experienced combat and stuff like that, is getting them to talk about it.
Mhm.
It's I think the military as a whole has done a fairly decent job of providing counselors to combat units, to get these soldiers talking about it. Um, and that was probably one of the things that helped in our situation, was to to talk to my kids about it, that and to reassure them, she's not gone. She'll always be your mom. You'll see her again someday. Um, and you may even feel her around you at different points in your life, but that she's we're still a family unit, and we'll always be a family unit. And so I think that reassured him. You don't really consider some of those things to come into play um, in your life, until you get to the end of your life at 70, 80 years old, you, and realize the magnitude and the impact, and how valuable family associations relationships are. But I mean, it was something we had to talk about when
Mm.
my son was 10, my daughter was 8, my other daughter was 4. So those conversations really never end. You're all One of the things I kind of learned is that you're continuously processing those things, those trials, throughout your life, even later on down the road. You're still, in a kind of a state of processing or reprocessing. So, but like I said, as far as it applies to my military career, it showed me the importance of getting soldiers to talk about their issues. And especially when I became sergeant major, that was, following a combat deployment, and you come back, and, it takes probably 12 to 18 months before stuff starts to come out of the woodwork.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, that was I think my biggest emphasis for my time as the battalion sergeant major was making sure that these soldiers knew the services um, that their service in the military, the services that were available to them. And the funny thing is that many of them didn't know.
Mm.
They didn't know, and so I took it upon myself as to become the educator, and to be the liaison between our soldiers and VA, and all the entities that provide service to the military family.
Well, I mean, and again, that you take those lessons that you learned in your family and you applied them to leadership at work, and that's what this book is so great. It's not just a leadership book; it's a life book, and I think there's a lot of great, powerful lessons in here. And we barely scratched the surface of this. So the book is, and again, I'll hold it up for those who are on YouTube. It's called Treading the Deep, and it is available, like you said. Now you can get the Kindle version, and then in June the book will be available. And it'll be available at all bookstores. Is that right? As I understand
Yep,
it?
yep. Barnes and Noble, Borders, some that I've never even heard of, some independent bookstores. And I'll be getting out to mainly Barnes and Nobles and Borders, to do book signings in different parts of the country. So hope to get out and see people, and be able to shake hands, and kind of connect with people in bookstores.
That's great. Well, I'm going to put some links to the book and where people can get it in the show notes. And again, this is a fantastic book for our listeners. Pick it up. Treading the Deep. You're going to get a lot of life lessons from someone that spent 30 years in the military. He's had a very interesting life, and I really highly encourage everyone who's listening in to pick this book up and to read about it. Brad, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your experiences here.
John, it's been a pleasure, and I enjoyed your book tremendously. And just so you know, got it right here. All the
Yes.
same boat, and that's not the first book; it's the second book. So the other book too that one's a bestseller too, correct?
Yes, yeah, they both end up being Amazon bestsellers. So, but the first book seems to be selling. It sells like crazy. I don't know why, but I
Well,
love it.
the funny thing about your book is that when I wrote the rough drafts of mine, there were the leadership chapters, and the leadership chapters were written exactly like all in the same boat, where it talked about something that happened to me in the military, and then kind of the life lessons from that followed. And when I started reading, I was like, this is exactly how I wrote several of my chapters. So
I think
Kudos.
we have some. I think the military gives you some really interesting experiences, and I think it's really neat because you and I are similar ages that you get a chance to sit back and think about those experiences when you get a little older and say, "Wow, that one thing changed everything," or that one
Yep.
experience changed everything. And so I think there's a lot of stories in your book like that where certain decisions, certain things put you in different directions, and that's why I love it. It's a fantastic book. So Brad, thank you for being on the show and sharing all of this.
John, a pleasure, and thank you for having me on the show. It's been awesome.
Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.